Hi there, and welcome back as we continue in our journey through the Gospel of John together. This week we're taking a look at John chapter 12 and this decisive decision time of Jesus where John notices that things begin to slow down dramatically in the Gospel. It's as though John is writing this and is saying, slow down, you don't want to miss this. This is really important. And he does that. He about splits the gospel in half. The first half are 3 years of Jesus' ministry. The second half is the last 2 weeks of his life. So it kind of gives us an idea of where John was putting the importance of his gospel and really zooming in there at the last little bit of Jesus' life. So that's where we are today. On August 16th, 1987, Northwest Airlines Flight 225 crashed just after taking off from the Detroit airport, killing 155 people. One survived, a 4-year-old from Tempe, Arizona named Cecilia. News accounts say when rescuers found Cecilia, they did not believe she had been on the plane. Investigators first assumed Cecilia had been a passenger in one of the cars on the highway under which the airliner crashed. But when the passenger register for the flight was checked, there was Cecilia's name. Cecilia survived because even as the plane was falling, Cecilia's mother, Paula Chican, unbuckled her own seatbelt, got down on her knees in front of her daughter, wrapped her arms and body around Cecilia, and then would not let her go. Nothing could separate that child from her parents' love, neither tragedy nor disaster, neither the fall nor the flames that followed, neither height nor depth, neither life nor death. Such is the love our Savior has for us. He left heaven, lowered himself to us, and covered us with the sacrifice of his own body to save us. So as we get into this, the first chapter in this big slowdown in John, where we begin to focus on the last part of Jesus' life, I think we have to take a look and understand that last words matter. They matter a lot. People don't mince their words. They don't hem and haw when it comes to last words. They know they've got one chance to set things right, to set the record straight, to say I love you, to tell the truth. They've got one chance to do that before their life is taken from them. And so people typically, they don't mess around when it comes to last words. And these are essentially the last words that we have of Jesus to his disciples. Now, there are 3 basic sections of this chapter that we'll cover today. We're going to skip the Palm Sunday section since we covered that around Easter. But each one shows us something else about Jesus and our response to him. Let's pick up the first part of the chapter. The first part of chapter 12 has us in Bethany, still, where Jesus went to raise Lazarus from the dead. Now, this is kind of a popular place for Jesus and his disciples to stay when they would visit Jerusalem. But it hasn't been very long since Lazarus was raised from the dead. We don't know exactly how long, but it hasn't been very long since Lazarus was raised from the dead, and the news is spreading like wildfire. Lazarus is alive. The mourners have gone, and it is just Mary, Martha, and Jesus' disciples. And it's time to party. It's time to celebrate. Yet, interestingly, raising Lazarus sealed Jesus' death warrant with the chief priests and teachers of the law. Why? Because John says of Lazarus. John notes that the whole world has gone over to him, according to the chief priests and the Pharisees. And so now Lazarus himself has become a target, because there can be no compromise between Jesus' way and the priests and the Pharisees' way. One promises freedom, and the other chains and shackles. No, there can be no accommodation. Jesus must die, and by all appearances, so must Lazarus. Somehow they have to stop this clarion call, this message that's out there. So despite the fact that it's a party, despite the fact that Jesus will triumphantly enter Jerusalem the next morning, there's a sobriety to the occasion which Mary picks up on. Imagine the atmosphere where just days before there had been wailing and mourning. Now there was laughter and joy. Nurse Mary Zollinger was on duty at Madison Memorial Hospital in Boise, Idaho, when the emergency medical personnel brought in little Logan Pinto's body. The 2-year-old had fallen into a canal and had remained submerged for nearly 30 minutes before rescuers found him. Efforts to revive him failed, and Logan was pronounced dead. The grieving parents wept and said their goodbyes, and Zollinger began preparing the body for the funeral home. Then the nurse saw Logan's chest move slightly. The child was still alive. Logan was airlifted to Primary Children's Medical Center in Salt Lake City. That evening, the 2-year-old was breathing on his own, and his color had returned. The police chief from Logan's hometown was overwhelmed. He said, "It's called divine intervention, I think. I don't know how to explain it. It's joyous and relieving." Who could describe the flood of emotion when the parents were informed that their son who was dead was actually still alive? That's the spirit, that's the sentiment that we find ourselves capturing in this intimate dinner with Jesus, Lazarus, his disciples, and the sisters Mary and Martha. So the question is, in spite of this joyous occasion, in spite of this incredible celebration, why is Mary being such a buzzkill? Why does she create such a scandal after the meal? Remember the last time the Gospels record them eating at Lazarus' place, Martha was scandalized by her sister, who was sitting at the feet of Jesus just like the rest of the men, something that was not allowed in Hebrew culture or society. The women were not allowed to learn alongside of the men. But interestingly, Mary's the only one who seems to be listening to Jesus, the only one who hears what is about to come and acts on it. Jesus has been talking to his disciples since Capernaum about the fact that when he goes to Jerusalem, that the chief priests and the elders of the and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law are going to find a way to put him to death. He's brought this up. He's talked about it. He's been rebuked by Peter. The disciples just are not getting on board with this train. It doesn't jive with what they see, because what they see is they see the Messiah. They see the Son of Man, this long-awaited for historical, almost mythological figure that has shown up in real time. And they're walking and seeing the miracles of Jesus, the Son of Man. The miracles that they see and the power that they witness, it just doesn't jive with the idea that anything bad could happen to Jesus. He has this incredible power, and he's got this charisma. People love Jesus. So what could possibly go wrong? So despite the fact that Jesus talks and talks and talks about what's going to happen, that he will go to Jerusalem because they're going to kill him there, despite the fact that they're going to kill him there, he's still going to go to Jerusalem. Mary's the one who understands. Mary's been listening. She picks up on what Jesus is saying. She doesn't have in her own mind a vision of what the Messiah should be. She simply knows Jesus. She knows Jesus. Out of all the disciples, only Mary gets it. And so she takes a 12-ounce jar of perfume. This has kind of multiple meanings. If Lazarus had died, that would have been about the only thing that they had to live on, was this perfume, this family heirloom, something very sacred, very expensive. These are not wealthy people, so this is something that's been handed down and passed down, and this is something very sacred and special to Mary. Not to mention the fact it's ridiculously expensive. We're talking like Chanel No. 5 or one of those other fancy perfumes. You can tell how classy I am, can't you? Oh well, it's the heart that matters. So she takes this full jar of perfume and she begins to apply it and anoint Jesus' feet and wash his feet, which is the act of a servant. She washes his feet and dries it with her hair and her tears. Not a very effective way of drying somebody's feet, but an incredible picture of grief and intimacy as Mary prepares Jesus for what is to come. Now, lest we miss the point, what Mary does here is absolutely, positively scandalous. undoing her hair and letting her hair down in front of these men, in front of Jesus, the Master, would be the equivalent of a woman wearing long skirts and sitting down and then hitching her skirts up above her knees. Scandal. Judas is the one that stands up and says, enough is enough. On the one hand, we have scandalous Mary, and on the other hand, we have Mr. Practical, Judas Iscariot. Judas says to sell the perfume and give the money to the poor if you want to do something with it. John goes on and tells us not that he really cared about the poor, because he was a thief and he liked to embezzle from the money bag. But Judas has his reason, and he sees this wasteful act of intimacy. And I wonder if there was something in Judas that was jealous. He's not one of the inner circle of Jesus. He's one of the 12 disciples, but he's not one of the three. He's not one of Jesus' very close inner circle. And he's certainly not Mary, Martha, or Lazarus. So it makes me wonder if there's a little jealousy going on here. We don't know, and John doesn't really say, but Judas is the one that speaks up and says, hey, look, something much better could have been done with that perfume than wasting it on Jesus' feet. Now, if you've been in any number of church board meetings or board meetings, this has probably come up at one time or another, not wasting perfume. That rarely if ever comes up. But you have two kinds of people. You have the plotters that are triple checking everything on one side, and the faith leapers on the other. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, you need both, lest this sounds like it's a maligning one side or the other. You need both. You need the due diligence of the plotters, and you need the action and the spirit of activism of the faith leapers. But getting them to work together can be really, really challenging. That's essentially what we have here. Mary is taking a leap of faith. She's doing something bold, something scandalous, something intimate. She doesn't know how Jesus is going to respond to this, but she trusts in him. Judas is taking the plotter route. He's coming up with alternatives. We could have done this with the perfume, or we could have done that with the perfume, and we didn't need to waste this perfume. Notice it's funny. It's not his perfume, but he's got an opinion. Anyway, I remember I saw this lived out at a youth pastors conference when I was a youth pastor down in Oregon when I first got out of college. Our kind of head guru guy called together a meeting of all the youth pastors in our conference, and we met together at Salem, Oregon. And we were there to talk about youth evangelism, how to reach teenagers with the gospel of Jesus, with the good news. What it would take to break through their walls and their defenses until they came face to face with Jesus. That was our question. And so we did what we had all kind of been trained to do. You know, we all had been to Bible college, and so we talked about this, and we talked about the Bible, and we talked a little theology, and we talked some practical things and some ideas and some brainstorming, and we did all that. And that was kind of part of the morning session. And in the afternoon session, we were going to kind of pick up and really put some laser focus to things and see if we couldn't whittle some things down. And we got halfway through the day when my friend Andy, who was a faith leaper, couldn't take it anymore. He was surrounded by plotters. And he couldn't handle it anymore. And I remember him raising his hand right after we got back from lunch and saying, look, I know you guys have put a lot of work into this conference and everything, and I know we've got a lot more ground to cover, but here's the thing. If we want to reach people for Jesus, and we want to reach teenagers for Jesus, why don't we just do it? And we looked at him like, that's why we're studying this and trying to learn. And he said, no, like right now. Let's just go do it right now. It's 2 p.m. There's plenty of teenagers that aren't in school right now. Let's go find someone, talk to them about Jesus. And everyone in that room felt a little uncomfortable, because we were not willing to be so bold, to be so daring. We needed our guardrails and our safety rails, our bumper lanes up in the bowling lanes. We needed our training wheels. We needed all the things that help us to present the gospel to kids. We couldn't just go and talk to them about it. That was a crazy thought. And yet, looking back to this day, I think that was the Holy Spirit of God prompting us to get outside of our comfort zone. Well, in this case, Jesus settles the debate honoring Mary for her insight and generosity by defending her actions as preparation for burial. You see, everyone is prepped. It's just that the disciples are ill-prepped. They think they're walking into a coronation, but Mary knows better. She's been listening when Jesus said his hour would come and knows that this is his final trip to Jerusalem. They're not going to a coronation, they're going to a crucifixion. The disciples just haven't figured it out yet. The second section in here is kind of interesting. John captures, I think, the very human element of Jesus in this chapter as Mary's anointing moves the conversation to his last days. Jesus is trying to prepare the disciples, but they have their minds made up. Jesus always gets away from the authorities. God is looking out for him. He's the Messiah. What could possibly go wrong? I had lunch the other day with an old friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a long time from Tonasket. He was down here and he was working with some growers down here. And we caught up a little bit and I asked him what he was doing and he told me what he was doing and I understood zero of it. He was speaking ag. Not egg like kind you cook in a pan, but agriculture. He was speaking agriculture, ag. And I don't understand ag. I don't understand the lingo. And so I just kind of nodded and I cared about what he was saying, even though I didn't really understand it because I cared about my friend. And then he said this phrase, and I love this. He said, the thing I like about working with growers is that they understand it all goes back to the dirt. I don't know what that means to Rich, but I know what that means to me. I know what that means in practical terms. I know what that means to Jesus. It means that one day every single one of us will be pushing up daisies. Death is inescapable. We don't get to choose how we die. But we do get to choose how we live. We don't get to choose how we die, but we do get to choose how we live. So as long as we have breath in our lungs, we should live for Jesus. As believers, we don't approach death with fear and terror, but with calm assurance that the God who leads the way in this life is leading the way in death as well. And we need to just simply trust and follow. I read a beautiful story about a church in Honolulu called Blue Water Mission. This small church started a restaurant called Seed, which gives people a second chance at work and at life. The article focused on a woman named Mary Nelson who started working at Seed last year. It was only the second job the 53-year-old had ever had. At the age of 14, Nelson's mother committed suicide, and she started working on the streets of New York City as a prostitute. At the age of 18, she tried to start a new life in Hawaii, but she kept working as a prostitute. Then when she was in her early 50s, some Christians at Blue Water Mission persuaded her to leave the streets and to try working at Seed. She spent the first 6 months washing dishes because she wanted to be far away from what she called, quote, the good people. But after a lot of hard work and love from the people at church, Nelson says, I get to be the person I was never able to be. I get to help people without someone trying to take advantage of me. Nelson noted that she makes in a month at Seed what she used to make in one night on the streets. She had it all: new cars, jewelry, travel, nice condos, though sometimes beatings, rape, and so much horror came with the price. You can't buy what I'm going through right now, she says. I never thought I'd be this person that I am now. Recently, Nelson went with her church on a trip to the Philippines to reach out to prostitutes. She told the reporter, I want those women to know there's hope. You can change. There are people out there that really want to help you, and you've got to believe. Just like when you went out there and took a chance on the streets, you've got to take a chance on this as well. Picking up in verse 23, Jesus replied, now the time has come for the Son of Man to enter into his glory. And the disciples are on board with this. They're like, yeah, it's about time. The Son of Man's going to enter into his glory. But Jesus goes on. He says, I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce many new kernels, a plentiful harvest of new lives. Those who love their life in this world will lose it. Those who care nothing for their life in this world will keep it for eternity. Anyone who wants to serve me must follow me, because my servants must be where I am, and the Father will honor anyone who serves me. My soul is deeply troubled. Should I pray, Father, save me from this hour? But this is the very reason I came. Father, bring glory to your name. Now, it's interesting to me that just before Jesus says this, it says that some Greeks wanted to speak with Jesus. And he never gives them a chance, he never gives them an audience, but he uses it to launch off on this tract about if a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But in its death, it produces many new kernels. Jesus is talking about his own sacrifice and what's to come, and the impact that his sacrifice will have on what will be the church. But it's interesting to me because, these Greeks, they represent the academia, they represent the aristocracy, they're wealthy and they're learned. They come from a different world than rural Judaism and rural Israel. It's night and day difference. And you have to imagine that there's some part of Jesus that would be incredibly tempted to philosophize and hang out with the Greeks and abandon his real mission if it wasn't for the fact that Jesus loved us so much and understood his mission in a way that nobody else really seemed to until after the fact. Jesus says those who love their life in this world will lose it. Why? Because life is loss. And the harder we cling to things and to people, the more we feel the loss when they are gone. That's not me just being a negative Nelly. It's the bitter truth of life. Life is about loss. Love and loss. So what is Jesus' alternative? He says, find your life in him and you will gain it. All that was lost can be restored, and all the injustices that we have lived through, all the wrongs, oh, by the way, those can be made right too. We so desperately want to see without faith, to lay eyes on the final product before it's done. But while we are alive on this earth, before God makes all things new, new relationships, new bodies, a new eternity, we carry around the seeds of hope, love, justice, and mercy. In the book, The Ascent of a Leader, Bruce McNichol and Bill Thrall tell of a woman who has a dream where she wanders into a shop at the mall and finds Jesus behind the counter. Jesus says, you can have anything your heart desires. Astounded but pleased, she asks for peace, joy, happiness, wisdom, and freedom from fear. And then she adds, not just for me, but for the whole earth. Jesus smiles and says, I think you misunderstand me. We don't sell fruits, only seeds. How we live matters, but who we live for matters even more. Picking it up in verse 37. But despite all the miraculous signs Jesus had done, most of the people still did not believe in him. This is exactly what Isaiah the prophet had predicted. Lord, who has believed our message? To whom has the Lord revealed his powerful arm? But the people couldn't believe, for as Isaiah also said, the Lord has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so their eyes cannot see and their hearts cannot understand, and they cannot turn to me and have me heal them. Isaiah was referring to Jesus when he said this because he saw the future and spoke of the Messiah's glory. Many people did believe in him, however, including some of the Jewish leaders, but they wouldn't admit it for fear that the Pharisees would expel them from the synagogue. For they loved human praise more than the praise of God. Boy, what an indictment of a line is that. For they loved human praise more than praise from God. Our third point. This, as Jesus says, is the reason that so many don't believe. It isn't that they haven't heard the same parables or seen the same healings or other miracles. It's that they've had a similar experience, but when push comes to shove, they love human praise above God's praise. Interestingly here, Jesus goes on to say that he isn't here to judge those who hear but don't obey. He claims he isn't here to judge the world, but they will be judged by the truth of what Jesus is saying at the end of days. Interesting. So what's our conclusion? The conclusion is this. Live and die with purpose, finding yourself smack dab in the middle of God's will. It isn't the safest place to be, but it is the only place to be. I've heard people say that before. The safest place to be is smack dab in the middle of God's will. What God are you reading about in the Bible? That is not the safest place to be, because God is not primarily concerned about our safety. He wants us to grow up. He wants us to love. He wants us to experience those things deeply and in a life-altering, maturing kind of way. When we live and die authentically with Jesus, we become the seeds that God uses to change lives. It doesn't matter our age or our health. Loving others defies both of these. We close with this story that illustrates how we thrive in Christ. I love this when I read this. What a pastor. The Nigerian city of Jos sits on Africa's great fault line between the Muslim north and the Christian south, and thus has faced terrible things in recent years. A Nigerian Baptist church was attacked by Muslim extremists who burnt the church building and the house of the church's leader, Pastor Sunday Gomna. On the second Sunday after the violent outbreak, when the people of that Baptist church returned for worship, they gathered in a little mud wall community center about 1 kilometer from the burnt church. Pastor Gomna stood up and offered some beautiful words of gratitude. He said, "First, I am grateful that no one in my church killed anyone. Apparently, during some of the chaos of the attacks, Pastor Sunday had gone around the community, and some of the Muslim people said, 'Pastor, thank you for the way you taught your people. Your people helped to protect us.' So Pastor Sunday was proud that his people did not kill any Muslims. Second, he said, 'I'm grateful that they did not burn my church.' Everyone looked at Pastor Sunday with disbelief. After all, everyone was meeting in a small, uncomfortable mud hut. The church had been burnt to the ground. But Pastor Sunday continued, 'Inasmuch as no church member died during this crisis, they did not burn our church. They only burned the building. We can rebuild the building, but we could not bring back to life any of our members. So I'm grateful that they did not burn my church.' He continued, 'Third, I am grateful that they burned my house as well. If they had burned your house and not my house, how would I have known how to serve you as a pastor? However, because they burned my house and all my possessions, I know what you are experiencing, and I will be able to be a better pastor to you. So I'm grateful that they burned my house as well.'" If you want to save your life, you have to lose it. You have to come to Jesus and lay it all down, all the things that keep you from Him. Lay them at His feet and allow Him to transform your life. I hope you have a wonderful Lord's Day. I love you. God bless you. Take care.